Let me ask you about what Keir Starmer said, which was his concern about age.
Yes.
You said, and I'm quoting you here, it would be, quote, appropriate and beneficial for children under 16 to have formal gender recognition. Is that to say that you would support, for example, an 8-year-old being able to have their sex legally changed?
I think in the committee that scrutinised this legislation, we heard from a wide range of trans people who knew well before they were 16 that they were trans. And I think we should be looking at processes where they can be recognised. That does not mean to say I'm saying we set an age at which it's fine. I think there will need to be much wider discussions around protection.
Below 16, you're thinking of a child below the age of 16 would have their own decision about whether to change their sex legally. So in theory, an 8-year-old could do that.
I think in principle, we should be exploring that. Let us remember that in Scotland, the age of legal capacity is currently 16. At 16, people can vote in Scottish Parliament and our local elections. People can get married. Those are, big decisions too. And I think this 16 is absolutely where we should be at the moment. And I would like to explore
Would you lower the voting age to be 8?
I think we should actually look at how young people in general are treated across society. I think there's a lot of...
So in Scotland, you'd like to see 8-year-olds being able to vote and legally change their sex?
That is not what I said. Please do not twist my words. I think when we're talking about gender recognition reform, it was very, very clear. If you go back and read the transcripts from trans people themselves, they knew below the age of 16 that they were trans. And I think we should explore options. That doesn't mean to say it's a blanket opportunity. We should explore options for that.
Well,
I think we need to
put your words to you rather than apparently putting them in your mouth. You said sex is not binary and immutable. Can you point to an example of a human being changing their biological sex?
I think it's very, very clear that when we talk about sex being binary in GCSE or O-level biology textbooks, that is a gross oversimplification of what is going on. And what we know in terms of the expression of how people live, in terms of...
That's not sex. Sorry, I'm asking you for an example.
Different relations to hormones.
I'm asking you for an example of where a human being has changed their biological sex.
When we look at how our bodies express hormonal relationships differently, hormonal levels differently. That binary definition that we are told is right is far, far, far too simplistic. It's not about necessarily overly changing, but actually very few of us know what our chromosomal makeup is because we don't.
Well, hang on, when you say it's not necessarily about changing, do you accept that there are no examples of human beings changing their biological sex?
I'm not actually sure we can say that because we don't have the chromosomal makeup of every single human being. We don't know that. Do you know what your chromosomes are?
Yes.
I've never had mine tested. I don't know what mine are. And I think only when they are displayed in different ways can we actually make those kinds of judgments. And I think the important point here is I'm not a trans person, but I think we have heard very, very clearly from trans people that this legislation is important to them. This legislation will make a material positive difference to their lives. That is the policy reality of this piece of legislation. Well, that is what we should be focused on.
Again, let me quote you. The story about the need to protect women and children from an insidious threat has never been true. In The Sun in Scotland 2 days ago, a report of a serial rapist who targeted female victims in toilets and changing rooms, who is apparently, according to the paper, trying to force a move to a woman's prison. A man called Jonathan Mellon told jail bosses he now wants to be called Charlene and has been bragging to fellow prisoners that he will be in a women's prison by Easter. Do you think that person and people like them should be able to change their sex legally and be treated as a woman?
I think if people are trans, then they should be recognised legally as who they are. Within Scotland, within the Scottish Prison Service, we have a very, very clear risk-based approach for all prisoners. And there's
But you wouldn't deny them the right.
Sorry, let me finish this point. There is no foregone conclusion that any trans woman will end up in the women's estate. There is no foregone conclusion that any trans man will automatically end up in the male prison estate. So to say that would automatically happen is simply not true. And the other thing to be very, very clear on this is we know that abusive, predatory men do not need to change their sex, do not need to change their legal gender in order to abuse women. Women have been abused in toilets, in single-sex spaces by men.
Yep.
Forever. People do not need GRCs to do this.
I understand that. But why on earth would a law be created that even allowed for the theoretical possibility of a person who is awaiting a trial for rape on charges of rape, a man with charges of rape, being able to legally change their sex in Scotland under this legislation?
Well, if that situation that you describe, if that person is a man, then any application to change to get a gender recognition certificate would be fraudulent. So it would.
How would you know that they're a man?
Sorry?
How do you know they're a man?
What I'm saying is the process by which one would obtain a gender recognition is a legally binding statutory process. It's not. Somebody doesn't just wake up one morning and think, oh, this is what I'm going to do. There is a process to go through. There's a statutory declaration to make. It's a legally binding thing, and there are penalties for making false statutory declarations. But the other side of the other point to make on this, I think, is really, really important. Trans people are not predators. And I think the reduction of this argument to predatory men is damaging to trans people. It's damaging to the wider LGBTQIA plus community.
It's not accusing anyone of being predatory.
We absolutely do not think that all people who are trans are predatory, and that
no one's suggesting
who are
that.
Seeking GRCs are predatory.
Absolutely no one is suggesting that.
Of these kinds of examples that keep being brought up.
Very good to speak to you. Maggie Chapman, Green Party MSP for North East Scotland, sat on that committee scrutinising the bill and, as you heard, supports the changes and possibly looking at further ones too.